The main responsibility of the United States legislative branch, or U.S. Congress, is to make the laws of this nation. However, they also have a number of other special powers, which today we are going to look at. The United States House of Representatives has three of these unique or special powers, while the United States Senate, or upper house, will have four. Beginning in the House of Representatives, and here you can see the House chamber in which the House of Representatives conducts its business. This chamber may look familiar to you as it is frequently shown on C-SPAN or C-SPAN 2. So if your remote control batteries should bug out whilst flipping channels, you can take in all the hot and steamy legislative action that occurs in this hallowed chamber. It is also the site of the President's yearly speech to Congress and the American people called the State of the Union Address. This is a once-a-year event during which the President stands up at the very large desk you see at the front of this chamber. During the speech, you will be able to see the Vice President over the President's right shoulder and the Speaker of the House over the President's left shoulder. And during this speech, the president will talk about where he or she thinks America is today and where he or she would like to see it go in the coming year. This event I always liken to a professional sports all-star game. So, in the all-star games, all the biggest names are there, and in the State of the Union, all the big names and little names of government are also in attendance. In the all-star game, you get to see all these star players play. But the outcome, win or lose, doesn't really matter. And in the same fashion, the president's State of the Union address is really political theater. The president gets up, talks about the issues of the day, and lays out his vision or her vision for moving forward. But like most of the words that come out of politicians' mouths, they don't mean a lot. The proof is in the actual doing. So it's fair to watch as it gives you some insight in what the President of the United States might be thinking. But as with all promises in life, I encourage you to reserve judgment until you see these promises in action. Anyway, this is the site of that event. So, the first of three special powers that belong to the House of Representatives is the power to begin the impeachment process. Impeachment is the process of bringing charges against a government official, usually either the President of the United States or a federal judge. These charges are brought for the purpose of removing the accused from office because they've done something seriously illegal. Both houses of Congress play a role in the impeachment process, and eventually we'll see the Senate's role. However, only the House of Representatives can begin the process by formally charging a government official of wrongdoing. After beginning the process, an impeachment trial is then held to determine if the charges are true, and the official is consequently stripped of their elected office and its powers. So to be impeached is the first step. One then must be found guilty before being removed from office. The most recent impeachment involved President Donald Trump, who was accused of using the power of his office to encourage foreign governments to investigate political opponents in exchange for financial aid from the United States government. And while President Trump was impeached, President Trump was also found not guilty of the charges and remained in office. The second unique power of the House of Representatives is the power to start all bills, which are potential laws, that call for raising money. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that any bill that might change taxes has to start in the House of Representatives. Any other bill could be on gun control, could be on immigration, could be on LGBTQ rights. Those bills can start in either the House or the Senate. However, bills dealing with taxes must start in the House of Representatives. A logical question is, why do bills that deal with taxes have to start in the House of Representatives? And the answer resides in something that you already know and has to deal with the election of members of the House and the Senate. Remember that originally the people, you and I, weren't allowed to choose our senators as they were chosen for us. The 17th Amendment, added way back in 1913, changed that and gave you the right to elect your own senators. But before that, you had no say in who your senators were. So the thinking was, okay, you can't elect your senators, but you do elect members of the House of Representatives. Therefore, if the government is going to create taxes or change people's already existing taxes, the people should have a say in the government officials who make such tax-related decisions. And as you only got to vote for members of the House of Representatives, members of the House were thus given the responsibility of starting any bill related to taxation. Today, you do get to elect your senators. However, the power of starting a tax-related bill still rests with the House of Representatives. Lastly, in the event that the presidential election does not result in a winner, today this would mean no candidate gets to the necessary 270 electoral votes, and this is really only possible if a third candidate can win some states in their electoral votes. Then the House of Representatives gets to choose the President of the United States from the top 3 electoral vote getters. So the House of Representatives is the tiebreaker in a presidential election, which again may seem counterintuitive because the United States Senate is known as the upper house. Again, this harkens back to the idea of you not originally getting to vote on your senators. If senators had been given the responsibility of settling an election, you could have had scenarios where the President of the United States had no connection to the people, because the people would not have chosen the president, no one got to 270, and the people didn't get to choose their senators, this is pre-17th Amendment, and therefore the president would not in any way have been chosen by the people. So the House of Representatives got the power to settle an election in which no candidate secured the necessary number of electoral votes. Remember, the other half of our bicameral Congress is known as the United States Senate, and they too have unique powers relative to the House. In fact, the United States Senate has 4 unique powers. The first of those unique powers relates to impeachment. The House of Representatives begins the process of impeachment by charging a government official with wrongdoing. However, it is then the responsibility of the Senate to hold a trial and judge the merit of those charges. We will look more at impeachment shortly, but for now, understand that the House of Representatives starts the process by bringing charges, but then the Senate holds the trials. The second special power concerns treaties with foreign nations. According to the United States Constitution, it is the president's job to negotiate treaties with foreign nations. These could be treaties that establish terms for ending a war. It could be a trade agreement with foreign nations, or it could be a treaty to, say, limit greenhouse gases, whatever. While the president, or more likely a representative of the president, negotiates this agreement with a foreign government, the United States Senate must first approve the treaty before it goes into effect. And they don't always. After World War I, almost all the major combatants signed the Treaty of Versailles, which formally set the terms for the termination of World War I. The United States, despite then President Woodrow Wilson's urging, did not, because our United States Senate did not agree with some of the finer points. Therefore, the United States had to work out a separate treaty with Germany to officially settle the terms for the conclusion of World War I. This is another example of checks and balances. The president may work out an agreement, but any agreement must pass muster with 2/3 or 67 of the 100 senators before it is formally approved. Another example of checks and balances comes to us in the form of the Senate's third unique or special power, that being the power to approve or reject certain presidential appointments. During their time in office, the President of the United States gets to select a number of government officials to serve various government positions. These are people not subject to election by the people. Most famously, they include members of the President's cabinet who advise the President on a variety of topics from national defense to the economy. Additionally, members of the Supreme Court of the United States can be chosen by the President whenever there is an opening. The check, however, comes in the form of the Senate having to approve these appointments by majority vote. So whoever the President picks must get 51 senators to say yes before that person assumes the position given to them by the President. If the President's pick is rejected, then he or she must pick another person and hope for Senate approval of that appointment. Lastly, in the event no presidential candidate wins the presidential election, that would mean no vice presidential candidate has won the election because they run as a pairing. So while the House of Representatives chooses the President of the United States, the U.S. Senate gets to choose the Vice President. This is about the only conceivable way in which you could have a president from one party and a vice president from another. Let's return to impeachment and look at some of the finer points of this congressional process. As mentioned before, charges are drawn up in the House of Representatives. This means that evidence of wrongdoing by a government official must exist. This process does not exist to remove ineffective or unpopular government officials. It exists to remove those who may have engaged in criminal activities and have thus proven themselves unworthy of the office to which they have been elected. After charges have been drawn up, they are voted on by the entire 435 members of the House of Representatives. In order to progress to the next step, a majority, meaning 218 or more of the House members, must agree that enough evidence exists to formally charge the government official. Remember, this is just about charging them. A trial is then held during which the charged official is given the opportunity to defend themselves. So, if 218 or more agree to the charges, we progress to the other half of Congress, the Senate, for the trial. The trial takes place in the Senate. During the trial, the Vice President of the United States is tasked with refereeing this impeachment trial. They serve as the judge. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to the Vice President serving as the judge. Can you think of a scenario or two in which it may be a bad idea for the Vice President to serve as the judge or referee? Number one, if the Vice President is on trial, it's probably not wise to have them serve as the judge in their own impeachment trial, as they may attempt to steer the trial to a certain not guilty outcome. However, potential conflict of interest exists additionally if the President themselves were on trial. In that scenario, the Vice President may be tempted to push the trial to a predetermined outcome. You see, a Vice President may, out of a sense of loyalty, look to protect the President, the person who chose them to be their running mate. Out of this sense of loyalty, they may fail to serve as an impartial judge. Or you may have a very ambitious Vice President who knows if the President is found guilty and removed from office, that the Vice President would now be the new President, And so, this very ambitious vice president attempts to steer the trial towards a guilty verdict so they can ascend to the top of the mountain. Because both these scenarios present a conflict of interest, the vice president is excused from judge duties if the vice president or president is on trial. If the vice president or president is on trial, then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would serve as the judge. The Senate serve as the jury, who sit and listen to evidence and make the ultimate determination of guilt or innocence in the trial. In order for the accused to be found guilty and removed, 2/3, a supermajority, or 67 of the 100 senators must vote guilty. This supermajority, or 2/3 threshold, ensures that members of both parties would have to agree to some degree to remove a government official for wrongdoing. Rarely does one party have 2/3 or 67 of the seats solely by themselves. And so, by setting the guilty bar at 2/3, it prevents one party, a party with a majority of seats, from using this impeachment process to remove their rivals. Again, impeachment is for removal of a government official due to criminal wrongdoing. It does not exist to exact revenge on your political rivals or remove government officials because you don't agree with their manner of governance. With the remainder of time, we will look at the 4 presidents who've had to dance with impeachment. 3 of the 4 were found not guilty, and 1 resigned because there was enough evidence to suggest that the posse was coming to exact justice, so this president resigned and beat feet out of town, always maintaining his innocence, but he resigned the presidency before most historians believe he would have not only been impeached, but also found guilty. So who was the first president impeached? The first president to have a dalliance with impeachment was none other than Andrew Johnson. Not Andrew Jackson, Andrew Johnson. Don't confuse your Jacksons with your Johnson. But Andrew Johnson had the unenviable task of assuming the presidency after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and he thus was president during a very challenging time in American history, a period known as Reconstruction. Now, it's called Reconstruction for 2 reasons. Following the Civil War, we were trying to bring a divided nation back together after 4 years of civil war, and that wasn't easy. Among the questions left to answer were questions like, when do we allow the formerly rebelling southern states to vote in elections? When do they get to serve in government? Etc. These were not easy questions to answer. Additionally, we had to physically rebuild the nation. After 4 years of fighting, and most of it in the southern states, there was a whole heck of a lot of rebuilding to take place, especially after General Sherman's adoption of a total war philosophy in his March to the Sea. So these are the problems that Andrew Johnson was tasked with solving, and his solutions were often in direct conflict with what the United States Congress at the time thought was best. So, Congress would pass a law, Jackson would veto, and Congress would override. Then Congress would pass another law, Jackson would veto, and Congress would override. Eventually, Congress got tired of the lather, rinse, repeat cycle and decided to impeach Johnson and be rid of him. So, in 1867, President Andrew Johnson was impeached. They charged him with conspiring against Congress, which basically meant he was plotting against them. And in 1867, there were not yet 50 states, there were only 27. However, the 2/3 or supermajority threshold still existed, which meant in order to find Johnson guilty, 36 of the then 54 senators had to vote guilty. This was a monumental moment in American history, as impeachment had never taken place. When the final votes were tallied, 19 senators voted not guilty, while 35 voted guilty. thus leaving Andrew Johnson one vote shy of conviction, meaning he was not guilty and remained President of the United States. Many historians point to this as an example of the system working. Johnson may have been a less than effective president. However, impeachment is reserved for criminal activity, and Johnson, at least as judged by his peers at the time, had not done anything criminal enough to warrant being stripped of the presidency. It's going to be another 100 years or so before we again hear impeachment being tossed around in conjunction with the presidency. In the 1970s, this man, Richard Milhous Nixon, found himself in a little hot water because of the goings-on at a now infamous Washington, D.C. hotel known as the Watergate Hotel. So, in 1972, then-President Nixon was running for a second term, and he was a somewhat paranoid fellow who wanted to make sure he didn't end up as a one-term president, like, let's say, the Adamses. To ensure a successful re-election campaign, he put into action, or at least had knowledge of a plan, to break into a Democratic Party office. Nixon was a Republican. And the Democrats had an office located in the Watergate Hotel. Well, the burglars were caught, and in the process of a long investigation, which uncovered incriminating recordings of discussions which Nixon had taken part in his Oval Office, the break-in was tied back to Nixon. So, with pressure mounting and the sound of the posse horses' hooves thundering on the not-too-distant horizon, Nixon resigned the presidency and saved Congress the trouble of having to impeach him. Nixon always maintained his innocence, and no trial was ever held because shortly after becoming the next president, President Gerald Ford, not without some controversy, pardoned Richard Nixon of any alleged crimes, believing it was in the best interest of the nation to move past the entire scandal. One of the lasting legacies of Watergate is that every scandal is now tagged as a gate. See Deflategate, Picklegate, Bridgegate, pick your favorite scandal. They've probably added a gate. Next up to be socked in the mush by impeachment was this man, one William Jefferson Clinton, also known as Slick Willie. Controversy always seemed to surround President Clinton. While in the White House, he was sued by another woman who claimed that prior to becoming president, he had sexually harassed her. Now, this was big news. Sitting presidents don't normally experience these types of legal challenges, never mind such salacious charges publicly. Now, understand that in his run-up to being elected president, Bill Clinton had also had to defuse accusations that he had cheated on his wife. Despite these accusations, he still went on to be elected president. Now, on the stand, facing charges of sexual harassment, he had to answer numerous questions while under oath. One of the questions concerned rumors that the president was, at the time, having another affair with yet another woman. This, under oath, the president denied. Later, incontrefutable evidence, DNA evidence, surfaced that seemed to show the president had been less than honest on the stand, which is understandable, but lying under oath is a crime. So, in 1999, President Bill Clinton was impeached. Now, this was crazy because you had all kinds of details that most people, including the president and the woman he was linked to, would have preferred to have remained private, ending up on the front page of every major American newspaper. Ultimately, the president was charged with lying under oath and attempting to interfere with the investigation into his alleged perjury. Here you can see a breakdown of the vote by the Senate on the two charges. Notice how 45 Democrats, and Bill Clinton was a Democrat, all voted not guilty. And the only guilty votes came from Republicans. I wonder what could explain this. We also see a very similar breakdown on the second charge. We'll come back to these votes in a moment. But understand, in the end, Bill Clinton remained in the White House, embarrassed no doubt, but also weakened as a president because of the scandal. Which brings us to the most recent impeachment proceedings, which involved none other than, love him or hate him, Donald J. Trump. Number 45, President Trump was impeached in December of 2019. Merry Christmas, Mr. President. He was charged with abuse of power and obstruction of justice. It was alleged that he essentially used a promise of $400 million in U.S. financial aid to the Ukraine in exchange for the Ukraine investigating and digging up dirt on the president's political rivals. Here are the results of when the Senate voted on the two charges. Clearly, with 67 votes needed for a guilty verdict, these votes fell short. What this graphic doesn't tell you is that all the Democrats voted guilty on both charges, while all but one Republican senator, Mitt Romney from Utah, voted not guilty on both charges. Interesting. Here on the final slide, you can see a political party breakdown regarding the votes on impeachment charges for both Democrat Bill Clinton and Republican Donald Trump. You can take away from this whatever you'd like, but when I look at this, unfortunately, what it looks like is no one really looks at evidence. Instead, it looks like in voting, senators first consider to what party does the accused belong. If it's my teammate, I must vote not guilty. But if he plays for the other team, then harumph, guilty he must be. And that, I would contend, is not what the system was set up for. The idea behind impeachment is to remove people who are undeserving of the office they've been elected to, not because of the job performance, but rather due to criminal behavior. Hard to fathom, that's how senators in both these impeachment proceedings also felt. How else could you explain virtually 100% support from one's own party while 100% opposition from your rival party? Unfortunately, facts seem to matter little as compared to political party allegiance in both these instances, thus illustrating that there are ideas put down in paper, and then there is reality in which those ideas are put into practice. Sometimes not in the manner intended.